Welcome to the module on sector-wise trade patterns, a case study from Indian economy. This particular discussion will be based on the backdrop of Indian economy particularly and how it has witnessed significant policy changes over the recent years. So basically, Indian economy has its origin with an agrarian economy which was predominantly dependent on agriculture, and finally it has come up to industry and to services. But in the early years of independence, Indian economy was considered to be an economy where agriculture was the primary occupation, but it has transformed into a diverse and a dynamic economy with substantial presence in the global trade arena. So which implies that initially India had adopted an inward orientation, but gradually India had come up with the global arena, particularly with its participation in the international market. So the country's economic liberalization, which has come up in the 1990s, have come up with the trade reforms, which has an integration with the global economy. And this integration with the global economy has come up in a bigger shape because this has resulted to significant increase in the volume of the trade participation. And accordingly, the trade patterns in the different sectors of the India were realized. It has been seen that the sector-wise pattern analysis is not only important for the economist, but also it's important for the policymakers, for the businesses and the researchers to identify the major potentials, the challenges, and what can be the policy prescriptions in this regard. This brings into the question that what is the backdrop behind the study? The backdrop behind the study is deep-rooted in the Indian economy, which has witnessed significant changes. And this has made the economy to be agrarian. India has transformed into the global model with the global presence arena, and sector-wise trade pattern is also coming up in this regard, particularly with the dominance of service sector taken up after the manufacturing, and then initially it was agriculture. This brings into the discussions of introductory issues of how the India's trade patterns have changed over time. First and foremost, it has been seen that with the liberalization reforms in the Indian economy since 1990s, the economy has opened up, and this opening has been done with the remaining parts of the trade, particularly in the globalization and the technological advancements. So as a result of that, the inter-trade dynamics or the sector-wise trade dynamics have evolved over time. More importantly, the Indian economy also have encompassed various sectors which has come up with trade potentials, particularly agriculture, gradually agro-processing zones, manufacturing, services, and most importantly the advent of IT revolution, which was called information technology sector, which has gained remarkable importance in the recent years, particularly from the year 2000. So as a result of this, all these has an impact or reflected in the India's trade patterns. Agricultural sector holds immense significance because of the large population of Indian economy and how agricultural sector contributes to the issue of food security. This is because India is known for the export of agricultural products like rice, wheat, tea, spices and textiles. And moreover, these sectors which are named are also facing certain constraints, particularly in terms of low productivity, in terms of logistics, and also the limited market access. So we have to understand deeply about the trade patterns pertaining to these subsectors in the agriculture, and very recently the allied sectors in agriculture are coming up, which is called value-added agriculture. For example, animal husbandry, pisciculture, horticulture, and also dairy farming, which are also considered to be one of the most important arenas which has export potentials. Next, we focus on the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector in India has grown over time with certain fluctuating trends, but it has contributed mainly for generation of employment, because it has been seen in Indian economy that there has been surplus labor in agriculture who has shifted to the industry for the job creation, and finally they have contributed to the export earnings. For example, the traditional sectors like textiles, garments, handicrafts, which were taken up and they have diversified, and also the newly modernized subsectors in manufacturing has come up like chemicals, automobile, electronics, and mainly the high-end products. So the trade patterns in the manufacturing will reveal how the India's trade agreements, how the India's opportunities for export competitiveness or technological innovations have added some of the improvements in the manufacturing. The service sector has come up as the most dominating role in Indian economy during the last decade. And this is with the entry of the IT and ITES, which is called IT-enabled services, which has taken up entire subsector in the services, particularly starting from healthcare, education, banking, even the government procedural matters. Everywhere there has been digitalization. And this digitalization has made India to be a core player or a key player in the global arena. Particularly, India is recognized for its IT and the software services, which has made India to be one of the preferred outsourcing destination. So the trade patterns in the service sector will give us clear idea about the role of the skilled labor or how the knowledge economy has gained over time. The information technology sector has to be mentioned separately because it has contributed to the gains of economic growth, particularly in the development of the software, the processing, the research and the development centers. So the India's competitiveness, intellectual property rights, innovation capabilities all have gained importance. So the trade patterns in India can be explained. Strength, weaknesses and potentials are to be addressed so that the policymakers can delve into these issues and can frame a good conducive environment for the trade competitiveness to develop. This brings us to the question of this regard, that what are the introductory views on sectoral trade issues? The introductory views goes back to the foundation of the Indian economy, particularly since independence, where India was absolutely agrarian. Later on, with the advent of economic reforms in 1990s, India opened up, diversified sectors have come up, and thereby they have changed or actually modified the shape of the trade patterns. More importantly, the agricultural sector which was coming up also has diversified into the food crops, non-food crops, cash crops, and also the value-added agriculture which has come up. So as a matter of fact, it has been seen that along with agriculture, manufacturing sector is also diversified into automobile, high-end services, and gradually the service sector has evolved over time as if it is considered to be the service-led growth. Now we move on to the overview of Indian economy, particularly in the context of economic policies. So the historical context goes back to the independence of 1947, when India was basically agrarian. Then we took up India as a mixed economy where both private and public sectors operate. Initially, there was state-led planning because it was absolutely dominated by the public sector, which was considered under the centralized mode of planning so that they can attain the commanding heights of the economy, with full focus on heavy industry development. And this heavy industry development was expected to bring in infrastructural development in terms of forward and backward linkages, particularly in establishing the inter-industry links and also to develop the capital goods sector, particularly the railways, the connectivities, the infrastructural developments, all these are taken up. But this approach did not yield much fruitful results because it was believed the trickle-down effect would come up, but it did not come up. So economy has to face certain inefficiency and bottlenecks. The current state of Indian economy is considered to be one of the world's fastest growing major economies or the emerging economies. Because this has come up today, even after 25 years of economic reforms, is because of the advent of economic reforms in 1990s, which has totally changed the Indian outlook in terms of outward orientation and making the economy to integrate with the global market. So these reforms have totally dismantled regulatory barriers, opened up foreign investment, and resulted in competition and efficiency. So today India has a diverse economic structure. India is a major contributor to the economy, and manufacturing services have contributed to the GDP's growth. Another important point that comes in this regard is about the economic growth indicator, which is the GDP, or the gross domestic product. Because when we talk about the gross domestic product, we look at the determinants and we see that the large consumer base, young workforce, technological advancements, and the domestic consumption, which has improved over the years and contributed to this variable. More importantly, foreign trade is also a key player, because foreign trade has contributed in terms of boosting exports, particularly the countries ranging over a range of exports starting from textiles, pharmaceuticals, technology services, and India has also come up in these commodities such as crude oil, machinery, electronics, and precious metals. So all these are taken up a bigger shape when India want to diversify their production basket. This also brings in with some of the policy initiatives which were taken up by the Indian government, particularly to support this outward orientation. And one of the policy initiative was to improve the business and the investment climate. And that was done by ease of doing good business. This is basically a good governance model which looks after simplifying regulations, promoting FDI, establishing the special economic zones, initiating the trade agreements so that they can take up across the regions. So due to impressive growth and development, India economy still faces certain kind of social handicaps, particularly in the socio-economic indicators like income inequality, unemployment, and obviously in terms of education reach. However, government continues to implement policies so that it can come up with a, most importantly, sustainable and inclusive growth. Because that is one of the most important motto of Indian government, is to make the growth to be broad-based, the growth to be shared, and the growth to be participatory. And that is what we call by inclusive growth strategy. So Indian economy has come a long way since independence. It has transitioned into a major player. Economic reforms of 1991 is both instrumental. So we can see that particularly over the greater regime, Indian economy is developed over the years. And that is how the trade patterns or the trade policy have changed. So now we come on to what are the overviews of the sectoral trade issues in India. The overview actually referred to the initiatives which are taken up by the Indian government. One of the strong initiatives is to go for export promotion. And this is done by providing some kind of incentives to the exporters, building up of the governance models like the Export Credit Guarantee Corporation or ECGC, or building up the special economic zones, which are basically a very clustered area to promote exports, to promote skills. So all these are in tune with the trade agreements which are signed between the countries and the regions. Another important point is that Indian economy still has to build on the social capital, which is deeply rested on education, health, and living standards. So that area needs to be explored. Then only they can reap the benefits of a sustainable and a safe future. Another important point is that India should be transformed into a major player in the global market, and for doing that, India has to build up very strong international competitiveness, particularly in terms of export basket and also in terms of diversified production market. Now we move on to the sector-wise trade patterns. First, we concentrate on the agricultural sector. It is seen that agriculture has a contribution to the Indian economy or to any nation, particularly in terms of food security and also in terms of the rural livelihoods. So basically, trade patterns are influenced by multiple factors like government policies, weather conditions, and global demand. So the first and foremost, we can see that India's export basket, which mainly comprises of rice, wheat, spices, tea and fruits, and imports consists mainly of edible oil, pulses. So when we talk about edible oils and the pulses, mainly the government policies are to provide some export restrictions or subsidies can impact the trade pattern. So export restrictions increases the domestic availability, stabilize the prices, and subsidies will make more competitiveness to come up. But these policies may have unintended consequences, or they can adversely affect the farmers' incomes. So when we take up these policies, there should be some kind of trial and error method or some kind of ifs and buts which are needed to be taken up. Another important factor which is influencing the trade patterns in agriculture is the climatic conditions. Because agricultural sector is actually dependent upon an uncertain factor, that is the climate. So as a result of that, weather conditions may lead to higher bumper output, or that is what we call the buffer production, or it can lead to absolutely disaster. So based on that, some kind of precautionary steps can be taken up by the government so as to combat with the flood or the droughts, whichever will come up, and they can lead to reduced exports, and as a result they can increase the imports to satisfy the domestic demand. At that time the foreign exchange can be actually getting exhausted. So trade policies and market dynamics, these two factors have implications for the farmers and the consumers, because these agricultural exports are making the farmers to get access to global market, and balancing the interest of farmers and consumers are very much important in framing the trade policies, because whenever we are balancing them, there should be good synergy between the two. Next, we move on to the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector is the secondary sector under the national income accounting, which contributes significantly to the GDP over the years, because this is absolutely observed in the traditional industry and the modern industry. So when we look at the traditional industry, we belong to the handicrafts, the iron and steel, but the modern industries which has come up, mainly the automobiles, the pharmaceuticals, the electronics and textile still is in place. So these are mainly driven by the cost competitiveness. So when we talk about the cost competitiveness, we mainly mean what is the cost of the inputs which are imported from abroad. Because majority of these manufacturing industries are actually importers of the intermediate inputs. So as a result of that, this is one of the constraints on their balance sheet or on the foreign exchange reserves. Another important term that comes in is about the human capital. It has been observed very recently that there is a question of talent deficit which occurs across the manufacturing. That means search for talents has to be done so that the skilled workforce can be built up. And more importantly, how these industries are capable of exploring the global market. Because most of these industries are actually funded only by bank finance, and there is no other access to finance. So as a result of this, they have the scarcity of the shortage of the capital funds. So in spite of these adversities, they have to explore the global market and what initiatives they can take or what kind of support programs the government can provide. So one of the most important variable which can do this is attracting substantial level of foreign direct investment. But in order to attract that, the country must develop certain potentials so that the FDI can get absorbed. So FDI can ensure technology transfer, development of infrastructure, market access, and more importantly, the manufacture sector's capabilities that also need to be developed. Additionally, when we talk about the government's Make in India initiative, then it is seen that the Make in India initiative aims to attract investment, promote domestic manufacturing, and enhance export competitiveness. So, however, there are serious challenges the manufacturing sector experiences during the trade participation, particularly in the logistics model, particularly in the governance model, and also in search of the specialized skill. That is why we say the skill deficit or the talent deficit is one of the major concerns. Now we go to the service sector. Service sector has taken up a dominant force in the Indian economy since the advent of IT revolution, which brings in the outsourcing and the automation activities, along with the business processes which have come up, and it has spread its spillover effects in tourism, financial services, and finally India has become a global hub for these IT-enabled services. So the trade patterns which has come up in the service sector has engulfed in the areas of software development, consultor operations, and the financial consulting services. So this has also taken up a major role with the advent of the skilled human resources, which has also given up one of the most important component for the service sector, because India's comparative advantage also lies up in the abundant pool of educated and English-speaking professionals, Service sectors are also considered a shift from the cross-border digital trade with more and more advent of online service delivery. And as a matter of fact, the global clients were addressed through these networking activities. It is seen that the service-wise trade patterns also have reflected diverse dynamics in agriculture, manufacturing, and other sectors. Because with the advent of the technological revolution or with the digital mode, all the sectors are actually interlinked with each other. And so this balancing has been done from different stakeholders like farmers, manufacturing, and providers so that it can contribute to competitiveness and welfare of the Indian economy. This brings us to the question on what are the sector-wise patterns. So sector-wise patterns mainly refer to diverse dynamics of agriculture, manufacturing, and services. The policymakers are taken up, and this balance can be done from different stakeholders, starting from the farmers, which are referring to the agro-processing farmers in today's agriculture, manufacturers, and definitely the different subsectors in the services which are benefited from this model. As a result, this will totally address to the sustainable growth, competitiveness, and welfare of this entire Indian economy. Now we move on to the factors which are influencing the trade patterns. The first factor that comes in is government policy and regulations. So when we come up with the government policy, it means how the trade policies are being affected by the government's decisions. Particularly, these policies can be removal of the trade restrictions like the tariff and the quota, making more subsidy model for the investors and also for the exporters, making the free trade zone, which is just like a special conclave, which can be done for the exporters, particularly to promote the special economic zones. At the same time, also to generate revenue or income from the livelihood creation. And more importantly, how the domestically produced goods can also be protected. That is also another concern of the government. So as a result of that, government policies are also instrumental in shaping up the trade patterns. Another important objective that comes up in this regard are the trade instruments. If we look at the first instrument, that is quota, which is imposing the amount or the quantity of the goods that needs to be imported. That means if this quota restriction comes in, definitely the domestic industries will get the zeal and the motivation to produce, and they can cater to the domestic demand rather than depending upon the imports and thereby decaying the domestic production. So quotas can influence the trade patterns and they can create the opportunities in doing so. Another important incentive that can come up for boosting exporters or for boosting the investors is the subsidy model, which has been given to specific industries, and as a result of that, they can protect from the global competition. So as a result, international market can be targeted. Free trade agreements, which is called FTA, also is very much important in shaping the patterns because they can reduce the trade barriers, they can make the participatory countries to evolve, and they can promote the trade. So this will definitely reduce the transaction cost, they can increase the business opportunities, and as a matter of fact, all these activities can take up a better shape. Another important issue that comes in is about the treaties which India has gradually signing in. For example, the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement, India-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership. All these are some of the treaties which India has signed with some of the global partners, making it more conducive to explore these trade potentials. Another important policy or effect that comes in this regard is globalization and international trade agreements. This comes up with the very word that globalization has come up, but in agriculture, the major event took when India became the member of World Trade Organization or WTO. So as a result of that, when India became the member of WTO, then WTO establishes certain rules and regulations which provides a platform for negotiation among the member countries. And through this, the multilateral trade agreements, different kind of trade potentials, expansion in the trade regime, all these are discussed within the WTO rounds, which India got the benefits. Moreover, India's participation has also crossed the shores It has crossed various regions just because of the favorable environment that India's exports have got. However, there are certain constraints, particularly with regarding the logistics, regarding the supply chain management, particularly in making the export to be a prompt delivery. Another factor that crops in this regard is technological advancements. Because what we mean by these technological advancements, mainly the communication and the technology, which will be enhancing the trade efficiency, and definitely it will facilitate the global connectivities. Because these global connectivities are basically rested in a digital mode or in a digital world. Another important factor which crops in because of this is the need to develop infrastructure. Because whenever the country wants to play an important player or wants to play in the global market, then the country has to come up with international standardized infrastructure. And for that reason, the infrastructural units like water transport, air transport or surface transport should have better and smooth movement of goods across the borders with respect to the ports or airports or the road networks. So this calls for an efficient logistics system. This calls for a promotion of the trade across the different sectors, making a good model to build in. However, there are certain challenges which also comes in. Technological advancements are very much important because with the technological advancements, we can opt for a digital platform or a portal which will take care of this communication, transportation and IT model more specifically. Trade efficiency would come up and global connectivity can be facilitated. That is very much important in this regard. Communication technology is becoming more faster, information exchange is coming up, and traders and streamlined supply chains also comes in. So as a result of that, better coordination must be there between these stages of the production process. Another important point that crops up is digital platforms and e-commerce. So whenever the digital platforms and e-commerce comes in, more avenues for trade, wider customer base and cross-border transactions can be done. As a result of that, greater access can take place in this regard. But at the same time, we can see that there are certain risk factors associated with this digital world. One of the strong factors is about the data security, about the intellectual property rights and regulatory frameworks. If these are weak or if these are not up to the mark, then there can be some kind of theft and which the country has to suffer. So as a result of that, any model for e-commerce will call for a stringent regulatory framework, will call for a better data structure so that technology can be used to promote trade. Another important factor which crops in to make these sectoral trade patterns to evolve is the infrastructure development. This calls for the supply chain management or the model which calls for adequate transportation, logistics, connectivity, so that efficient movement of goods and services takes place. This also brings in the competitiveness that are wanted, and this can also involve a public-private partnership model which was operative in some of the airports which are constructed in the Indian economy. So efficient logistics system, including warehouses, distribution centers, all these are important for the prompt delivery of the goods and services. So as a result of that, we can see that the connectivity infrastructure, that is the broadband connectivity or the mobile banking, all these are absolutely important in this regard. So when we look at the mobile banking, we refer to the internet connectivity and the basic electrification which is required for this entire domain or this dynamics. So then only we can see that the entire global economy can be inclusive so that every individual of the country or of the globe can take the advantage of this digital innovation or this model through trade and sectoral patterns. Indian government has recognized the importance of infrastructure development, particularly in creation of the corridors. Because whenever we are talking about the sectoral trade patterns, most importantly, the freight of goods and services and the corridors needs to be developed. For example, the Bharatmala project, the Sagarmala project, and dedicated freight corridors which are created. Digital India is actually very much in the offing and absolutely in place because it is supporting the e-commerce and the digital trade. which takes care of unlocking the potentials of the economy across the various sectors, particularly how the sectors can be interconnected. So this calls for implementation of infrastructure projects so that the infrastructure bottlenecks can come up and trade operations can become more hassle-free and seamless. So this brings us to the question of what are the factors influencing patterns. So the first factor is definitely the transportation, the logistics, the entire system of competitiveness, the distribution system, the connectivity, particularly internet, highway, which makes it seamless. As a result, the transaction costs can be reduced, and as a matter of fact, entire global economy can take the benefit of it. Now we move on to the challenges in the trade patterns. So, challenges in the trade patterns calls for the weaknesses which needs attention from the policymakers. The first challenge that comes is inadequate infrastructure. Because looking at the global competitiveness or looking at the requirement to make India to be a strong international trade player, the fundamental infrastructural issues arise, particularly the power deficit, that's the energy deficit, also the logistics facilities, which should be more and more internationally standardized. And this will refer to more delay, increased cost, and as a result of that, Indian government should understand the importance of these issues. Another important issue that comes in is for trade facilitation and attracting the foreign investment, because this goes back to the major corridors which are created. Another important factor is search for the talent. That is what we call talent deficit. That's a skill gap. Because this is coming up as a demand-supply imbalance between the skills which are imparted and the industry skills which are demanded. So as a result of that, India often faces this skill gap, which is also questioning the demographic dividend so that it should not end up in demographic penalty. So as a result of that, skill development programs are initiated like Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which will provide industry-relevant training and enhance their employability. As a result, collaboration between the education institutions and the industry, that we called industry-academia interface, that also should come up so that the workers are equipped with necessary skills. Another important point that crops in is the trade imbalance. Because when we talk about the trade imbalance, it's the significant sectors so that they can take up, for example, the trade deficit, the economic stability, and also the trade incompetitiveness that comes in. As a result, technological advancements, dependency on imports, all these are important factors. So to promote the balanced trade, it is important to diversify the export products. Value addition should come up, the important strategies for meeting this demand. Regulatory barriers must be lifted up. For example, the cumbersome procedures, the excessive paperwork, because all these are making the approvals to be more delaying. But in this digital world, it can be done at one go. So all these are actually influencing the bureaucratic hurdles. This brings us to the question on what are the challenges in the trade patterns. So the challenges in the trade patterns are mainly in the governance, in the infrastructure, and also in the skill gap, which requires policy attention or the intervention of the government along with other stakeholders of the society. So in this particular discussions of the case study, which is taken up with reference to sectoral trade patterns, most importantly, it is recognizing India as one of the significant drivers of economic growth or as one of the emerging economy with service sector coming in. And also it is taken up over by the agriculture and the manufacturing. The shift is driven by the factors such as skilled workforce, digitalization, and more importantly, a conducive business environment. As a result of that, this will be crucial for the job creation, making the economy to be more inclusive so that greater attention can be given in this regard. It is important for the policymakers to have a more comprehensive and a balanced approach to trade promotion. A comprehensive means it will engage larger section of the society, and a balance means all the sectors must be given equal footing in the international market. As a result of that, competitive advantage can be there in the services, manufacturing, and so this calls for building up of domestic fundamentals, like building up of strong infrastructure, reducing the bureaucratic controls, promoting the innovations and definitely technology adoption. So as a result of this, India can harness the growth potential in terms of sustainable economic growth, job creation and the living standards. And then only we can see that the sectoral trade patterns can move in a dynamic and in an uniform manner. And that is how the inclusive global economy or the inclusive growth can take place in this regard.